I'm saying the consumers have the power, whereas in the second sentence I'm showing contrast. Nevertheless, businesses and companies should try to be more eco-friendly. So just an example of that contrast discourse marker to show a difference in opinion. And it really does help organise our writing and show that we're really thinking about what is coming up and how we're going to structure our sentences. Okay, let's take a look at the last group, which is for results. And the question: as the number of cars increases, more money has to be spent on road systems. Some people think the government should pay for this. Others feel that drivers should cover the costs. Sounds like a tricky topic indeed. I don't think I would want to be paying for all costs on roads. Now let's see my topic sentence here. It could be argued that in many countries, citizens and motorists already pay a very high amount of tax to the government. Consequently, it would be unfair to ask for further money paid by the general population to also help keep roads working efficiently. So this first sentence, my topic sentence, introduces an action. So citizens already paying a lot of tax. So it talks about this behaviour, high tax. I want to say the results related to the question. So topic, citizens already paying high tax. Consequently, it's unfair to ask for more money to fix the roads. Discourse markers for writing task 2. Don't worry if you're not sure what discourse markers are, because I'll be explaining in full shortly. So, writing task 2, something that we definitely have to use, sentence openers, and that's really all that discourse markers are. It's a fancy way of saying sentence openers. So I'm going to share with you some really useful tables that give you extra information about the types of sentence openers that you can use for task 2. Let's take a look. Up first we have addition, contrast, and results. So these are 3 groups for different kinds of discourse markers that we can use in our task 2 writing. Addition, of course, for giving extra information. Contrast, to show a difference in opinion or possibly ideas. And results, to see basically the results of something. It kind of explains itself. And of course we have our focus. In as many discourse markers and those classic in full shortly. So writing task 2, something that we definitely have to use, sentence openers, and that's really all that discourse markers are. It's a fancy way of saying sentence openers. So I'm going to share with you some really useful tables that give you extra information about the types of sentence openers that you can use for task 2. Let's take a look. Up first we have addition, contrast, and results. So these are 3 groups for different kinds of discourse markers that we can use in our task 2 writing. Addition, of course, for giving extra information. Contrast, to show a difference in opinion or possibly ideas. And results, to see basically the results of something. It kind of explains itself. And of course we have our focus vocabulary to the left of the table, and to the right some simple examples just to show you the types of use that you can have. Now we've talked about connectives and specifically sentence openers throughout the course, but I think you might want to note or bookmark this section of the video just so that when you're writing you can refer back to this language, as it is really useful indeed. So yeah, I would definitely suggest bookmarking now, and then you can read through and return back to these tables when you need. Now there's something I want to say before I show you examples of use. So in this lesson I'm going to show you how I use some of these discourse markers against task 2 questions, just to give you a bit of a deeper understanding. But before I do that, I just want to say this: don't overuse discourse markers in every sentence opener. I want to I'm going to show you how I use some of these discourse markers against task 2 questions, just to give you a bit of a deeper understanding. But before I do that, I just want to say this: don't overuse discourse markers in every sentence opener. What I do see students often do, or sometimes do, is to try and really jam in as many discourse markers and those classic task 2 sentence openers as they can. And really it shows a lack of flexibility in their English fluency. What I mean by that is that although we do love discourse markers and really interesting sentence openers, if you use them too often, you're overusing a strategy. And to really get those higher band scores, we're talking 6.5, 7s and above, you need to show a range of structures in your writing, always opening with things like additionally, therefore, as a result. Because of this, it just becomes too robotic, it becomes unnatural, and it really doesn't show off the skills that I'm sure that you do have. So in the examples I'm going to show you, I'll just show you kind of like some answers against questions with discourse markers that aren't really overused. So let's begin with that. Up first we have addition, and I'll show you an example against the question here. Let's read through that now. Some people think that the best way to succeed is to get a university education, while others disagree and say that it is no longer true nowadays. Discuss both views and give your own opinions. So I'm not going to give you the whole answer, I'm just going to show you an example of part of maybe a supporting paragraph against this question. And what we'll do is introduce our writing with a topic sentence, just generally giving some information and opening my ideas. There are many ways in which attending university can be of a huge benefit to people, including by improving overall skills and knowledge. So I've given this topic sentence and I might want to add extra information. A great way of doing this is of course to use a discourse marker. Now just to say, obviously we have two sort of longish sentences here, and it's good that we're not opening both with these common sentence openers. Just the second sentence is using this discourse marker, moreover. So let's read through. Moreover, once a person has developed proficiency in a range of skills, they become valuable assets to many businesses, which is very true indeed. Okay, so that just shows you an example of using one of these addition openers, discourse markers, in order to add extra detail to my writing. Let's take a look at the next discourse marker group, which is contrast, showing difference, possibly an opinion or ideas. And our question first. Some people think that manufacturers and shopping malls should sell fewer packaged products, while others argue that people have the responsibility to buy products with less packaging. Interesting question. Let's see my first idea here. So here's my topic sentence introducing my ideas. The real power lies in the hands of the consumers, who, given the amount of choice available, are easily able to avoid buying certain brands or products. They've got so much choice. However, or what you see a lot of students use is on the other hand, which is great, but something like this, nevertheless, it's really quite colloquial in sounding. I don't know, obviously don't try to use this just because I said I liked it, but I think it's an interesting contrast discourse marker. So let's read through. Nevertheless, companies should look to try and reduce plastic use, or at least look to use more eco-friendly materials where possible. So there I'm showing a contrast. Topic sentence, that first sentence with the embedded clause, I'm saying the consumers have the power, whereas in the second sentence I'm showing contrast. Nevertheless, businesses and companies should try to be more eco-friendly. So just an example of that contrast discourse marker to show a difference in opinion, and it really does help organize our writing and show that we're really thinking about what is coming up and how we're going to structure our sentences. Okay, let's take a look at the last group, which is for results. And the question. As the number of cars increases, more money has to be spent on road systems. Some people think the government should pay for this. Others feel that drivers should cover the costs. Ooh, sounds like a tricky topic indeed. I don't think I would want to be paying for all costs on roads. Now let's see my topic sentence here. It could be argued that in many countries, citizens and motorists already pay a very high amount of tax to the government. Consequently, it would be unfair to ask for further money paid by the general population to also help keep roads working efficiently. So this first sentence, my topic sentence, introduces an action. So citizens already paying a lot of, and it kind of explains itself. And of course we have our focus vocabulary to the left of the table, and to the right some simple examples just to show you the types of use that you can have. Now we've talked about connectives and specifically sentence openers throughout the course, but I think you might want to note or bookmark this section of the video just so that when you're writing you can refer back to this language, as it is really useful indeed. So yeah, I would definitely suggest bookmarking now, and then you can read through and return back to these tables when you need. Now there's something I want to say before I show you examples of use. So in this lesson I'm going to show you how I use some of these discourse markers against task 2 questions, just to give you a bit of a deeper understanding. But before I do that, I just want to say this: don't overuse discourse markers in every sentence opener. What I as they discourse markers are, because I'll be explaining in full shortly. So, writing task 2, something that we definitely have to use, sentence openers, and that's really all that discourse markers are. It's a fancy way of saying sentence openers. So I'm going to share with you some really useful tables that give you extra information about the types of sentence openers that you can use for task 2. Let's take a look. Up first we have addition, contrast, and results. So these are 3 groups for different kinds of discourse markers that we can use in our task 2 writing. Addition, of course, for giving extra information. Contrast, to show a difference in opinion or possibly ideas. And results, to see basically the results of something. It kind of explains itself. And of course we have our focus vocabulary to the left of the table, and to the right some simple examples just to show you the types of use that you can have. Now, we've talked about connectives and specifically sentence openers throughout the course, but I think you might want to note or bookmark this section of the video just so that when you're writing you can refer back to this language, as it is really useful indeed. So yeah, I would definitely suggest bookmarking now, and then you can read through and return back to these tables when you need. Now, there's something I want to say before I show you examples of use. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how I use some of these discourse markers against task 2 questions, just to give you a bit of a deeper understanding. But before I do that, I just want to say this: don't overuse discourse markers in every sentence open. To teach it to them. Of course, I don't need to include my opinion. We'll now move on to some modelled writing for task 2 plans. So we're going to take a look at some more examples of task 2 questions and plans, and you're going to better understand how to write your own plan and see why a task 2 plan is so important. Okay, let's jump right into our first IELTS task 2 question. And I think it's important for me to say that these are taken from past IELTS tests, so they are very much the type of questions that you might need to answer on the day of your test. Okay, let's read through this question. Many people are finding it increasingly important to wear fashionable clothes. Is this attitude to wearing clothes a positive or negative development?
As with any task 2 question, before we start writing our plan, we should identify what type of question this is, and is it asking for an opinion? So on the left, I have the 5 question types. Let's return to the question. So many people are finding it more important to wear fashionable clothes. Is this attitude a positive or negative thing? Do you agree or disagree? So this question is in fact using different language, an agree and disagree type question. So now that I've identified the question type, I can begin to write my plan. You remember from the master structure, the 4-step structure for each question type, that the first supporting paragraph should be for agree, or the positives, and the second supporting paragraph should be for disagree, or the negatives. Of course, the conclusion comes after. Okay, so I think it's time for me to start writing my plan. I'm going to begin with the positives, and I'll write a few ideas down here so that when I come to begin writing, I'm not going to be troubled by not having enough ideas. So the positives of people wanting to wear fashionable clothes. Well, I think the first thing that I would discuss is maybe that it's not harming anybody specifically. So if people want to wear fashionable clothes, they should feel free to do that. And how about we also say people will be dressed smarter, which could be considered a nice thing. I'll just change the font here slightly to fit everything in. Okay, is there any other positives? I could say also fashion is an important part of the economy. So it's a job for some people. It makes some people money and therefore they have jobs in it. So if people want to wear fashionable clothes, they're actually supporting people's jobs. And now we'll move on to discuss the negatives of people wanting to wear fashionable clothes. I guess one of the main things that comes to my mind is that people will feel more stressed and worried that, are they looking as fashionable as they can? So people may become stressed, unhappy. So that could be the first thing that I discuss in my second supporting paragraph. And is there any other negatives for people needing to wear fashionable clothes? Where are the clothes made? Sweatshops, we could say. So is it are the clothes made in places where people are paid fairly? We have this phrase, this noun phrase, a sweatshop, which is a word that is used to describe a place often in poorer countries where people work in poor working conditions to create fashion and clothes for high street shops back in the West. So that's something that I can discuss. Is it ethical where the clothes are being made? Okay, let's read this back. Paragraph 1. Not harming anybody. People will be dressed smarter, which might be nice. Also, fashion is an important part of the economy. It provides jobs and works for plenty of people. Supporting paragraph 2. People may become stressed or unhappy trying to keep up with fashion. And also, where are the clothes made? Sweatshops. Is it ethical? Are children or other such people making these clothes? So that's definitely something that I can discuss for the negatives. And I'm also being asked to give my opinion, of course, because this is an agree and disagree type question. So my opinion for the conclusion would be people should be free to wear any type of ethical clothing. So if it's made in the proper way, why not? Okay, so that's my complete plan here for this question. Realistically, if you're in a test, it might take you a few minutes to do this, and it will really prepare you to begin writing. So let's take a look at the next example question. Music is taught in almost every primary school in the UK. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of teaching children music? Well, this isn't really difficult to work out what question type this task 2 question is, as it says advantages and disadvantages, and that's exactly right. This question is an advantages and disadvantages question. You should note that you are not asked to give your opinion, so you don't need to include this in your conclusion. Okay, I think I'm ready to begin writing my plan. So in my supporting paragraph 1, I will discuss the advantages. I think some points here could be helps children to express themselves. It helps children to express themselves, and another point could be it helps children learn to take risks. For example, and it's always good to give examples in task 2. If children are singing, they may be embarrassed at first, and by singing, they learn how to take risks. Okay, that's just a couple of points for the advantages. Now let's take a look at some of the disadvantages. The first thing that comes to mind is often music has less paid employment. So if children are learning it, will they be able to get jobs in that kind of field? Another kind of argument may be that reading and writing more important. I might sort of discuss whether I believe that literacy and reading and writing are more important. And I'll think of one more point here, which could be, let's think, not all children like music. So there's plenty of children that don't actually like music. Do we have to teach it to them? Of course, I don't need to include my opinion in the plan because I haven't been asked to give that. Let's have a read through my plan. So, paragraph 1 helps children to express themselves, be creative. Children learn to take risks. And supporting paragraph 2, the disadvantages. Often music has less paid employment. Should we be teaching subjects to children where there might not be any jobs in it? Reading and writing more important. I could argue that literacy and communicating in language is more important. And lastly, for my disadvantages, not all children like music, not all people like music. Should we be teaching it to them in a compulsory way where they must learn it? Okay, so once again, this plan has helped me to really understand this question. So I know exactly what the question is asking me, what type of question it is, and I'm able to plan the details in my sentence structure that we learnt in an earlier lesson. That 3-sentence advantages of this trend. I just showed. It kind of explains it.
Probably thinking, I don't really know what hedging is. I've never heard of this before. Well, that's a hedge, but this isn't hedging. Even though it's a hedge, that's not what. So this is more of a definition of the term hedging, a general financial risk. That does have some implications for the meaning of hedging within less specific. You're kind of hedging and giving general. We'll talk about more examples as and other words that we can use. It's often found in those higher scoring IELTS writing essays, so really useful there too. Less specific. So phrases like ideas. So without mitigate its negative effect. Definitive ideas, being a bit less specific. So adverbs like so super useful to use the strength of a statement, saying that it happens sometimes, but not all about hedging. Online shopping offers convenience and a wide range of options for consumers. Online shopping generally offers convenience and a wide range of options for consumers. So again, using these adverbs to be less specific and show more of a balanced perspective also. It doesn't always offer convenience, but it generally does. Okay, our next technique for hedging is modal verbs. Might, could, may, should, all used for possibility, probability, or also recommendation, but specifically for hedging, possibility and probability. These modal verbs, super useful. Let's see an example without hedging. Increasing investments in renewable energy sources will help mitigate the effects of climate change. Where would you make the change and add the modal verbs? Maybe you would want to pause the video now and try and add modal verbs so that you are hedging in your example writing. Climate change. And of course you could use could, may or should pretty interchangeably here in this example. Okay, so lastly, using for hedging. I'll not read all the way through them, but here are some really useful phrases for hedging. Adverbs of certainty. And you can use of passive voice, emphasis on action. And of course, because there are times when the action and not the subject are more important, we want to really focus on the event, the behaviour, the action, instead of the who, the subject. Also, when we're giving statements or facts, which we might often do in task 2, and we can use the passive voice to do this as well. And our last use is for expressing general opinions. So we can use a passive voice when we're talking about really the stress is on companies. In the second version, it's more about the action. Now let's challenge. So here in Hello and welcome back to your next Task 2 IELTS writing lesson. So as you can see today, we're going to be taking a look at another question, and much like I did with a Task 1 report, I'm going to do some live feedback on a former IELTS 7 Plus student on their Task 2 essay. So I'm going to do some live feedback on it. I'm going to sort of give it a band score. I'm going to talk about areas for improvement, and then I'm going to make some edits live as we go through the essay, maybe a second or third time. But first, I'll be giving it a band score. I just want to take this opportunity to remind you again that you can repeat the video lessons in course. I think that's a really important thing to do, especially those modelled right videos for IELTS writing. Watch them multiple times. That will help you to internalise, to remember, and be able to use the grammatical structures I use. This repetition of rereading many times those model answers will really help you to almost act, to acquire, to get that writing voice to sound more academic. And it's kind of a really useful technique to reread multiple times those essays that I've written for you, both live as well as in the model answers. So just another tip for you all there: watch them multiple times, read through those model answers in the course many times. You know, you might want to read them 2 or 3 times a day for a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and that will really help you learn the voicing, learn the structures, and learn the grammatical structures as well as you know, it will help with your reading. So just a quick tip, just something I wanted to point out to you. Okay. Excuse me, we're on to our live Task 2 feedback. So I know this is a really useful lesson for you, and I'm happy to get this uploaded for you as well. So we have our question here. Let's have a read through.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our modelled writing videos. So today we are going to look at 2 Task 2 questions. Rainforest is a serious extent do you agree or disagree? Right, so the first thing that jumps out at me is the question type. To what extent? So it is an opinion question, and they want us to tell them to write in our essay whether we wholeheartedly agree fully, or perhaps we completely disagree entirely. Or for this question, which is quite nice, we could do agree and disagree. So I quite like these questions because it allows for a bit of flexibility there. You can decide which route to go down, what will be the easiest to argue. I always say go for the easy options because you don't want to, even if it's conflicting with your own personal views, it's better to go for something down a path which you can easily argue rather than one that you necessarily agree with. So we can decide what examples we've got, what pops into our head, what we think about the answer, and go with that the simplest way then. Okay, so talking about what ideas come to our head, it's really important to put together a plan. Now we might think, oh, okay, well, I don't need to plan, it's only 40 minutes, there's not enough time to write a plan, but that is precisely the reason why a plan is so important. It is crucial to put one together because you only have 40 minutes, and we're being marked on our ability to answer the question, stay relevant, stay focused, write a succinct essay. So a plan really helps with that. Okay, then with that being said, let's think about our first paragraph. Now, the first thing that comes into my head, well, absolutely, it is a serious problem, and it's definitely one of the contributors to the loss of animal life and human life. So I'm going to agree for my first paragraph. It is definitely a contributor because the rainforests are big oxygen producers and they absorb CO2. So of course less trees means these problems are getting, the CO2 is increasing, and we know that CO2 contributes to global warming, which will eventually lead to loss of life. Down the line. Okay, and the actual physical act of taking away trees, of course, destroys habitats. Wildlife is forced closer to human beings. Humans. This can lead to more loss of life. And actually, we could talk about the examples of diseases that are being contracted from animals, recent examples of that. And this is very much due to our worlds colliding, if you like. Because of the loss of habitat, animals are forced to live a life much closer to human beings, and this can lead to lots of problems. Okay then, so there's no denying it is a serious problem. However, there are other issues which play a part in the extinction of animal life and human life. So we can talk about, it's not the only one, there are things like burning fossil fuels, which are really catastrophic for the environment, which increase CO2 levels inevitably. Fuel consumption in general, transport. We can talk about the farming industry, which is destroying land in order to farm animals, to keep up with the global demands for food. And also we could potentially mention that reporting on this topic maybe cannot always be trusted. It might be over-exaggerated, say, the impact of blogging. Okay then, so, two words. So let's just put it's an opinion question, so we're going to state our opinion. Logging is, of course, is contributing to loss of animal and human life, eventually. But however, there are also other factors. Of course, we'll expand this in the essay itself, but for now, we're just putting a reminder there so that we stay focused for this one. Okay then, so that's our plan. I think we've got an entire habitats.
back together. A person's financial situation. Broadly speaking, trees are a natural environmental balancer. They produce oxygen and absorb CO2. With this in mind, less nature or logging is leading to less nature. Logging is leading to less of the natural world, and therefore an unbalanced one, which will result in catastrophic events like events such as, I don't want to use extinction, grave events such as dying species. Okay, so we are stating our opinion and we are just elaborating a little bit on that. Let's talk about the habitats, actually breaking up territories and animal families and things like this. On diseases. Reliance on fossil fuels. That
just wanted to talk through the way that we're going to approach this. So, in one paragraph, we're going to have a question. Now let's look at another task. On another note, only issue fossil fuels. Also, undoubtedly, should be. You can see the structure, so perhaps you could always remove one example. On crime, for paragraph 2 is a problem. And what could the government do? Well, the local government could increase maybe police presence, and they could also encourage community projects to keep kids off the streets, maybe. It's detrimental. Okay, in order to, let's talk about the lobbying. In order to put pressure on the government, Okay, let's expand this a little bit more. So poor housing as you are, or maybe we could say it is thought that you are more likely to not get caught if you commit crime, as resources are stretched regardless. In a place with, for example, millions of people, it can be easy to be anonymous. Okay, so that's the issue of crime. What can people do? Policing, the government could enforce that. So branches of government could be dedicated to housing and crime has stemmed from many people living in close quarters. And welcome back to and energy levels, which can help with our well-being, which all contributes to a healthy life. Okay then, so in that case, I think we can go to our write-up